what would a home gardener want to know just starting out about like maybe the sheer variety that exists?
To know that there are literally thousands of varieties, not thousands available, and they're very different in the way they taste and the way they grow and how easily they are to manage, how many runners they might produce, how many flowers, how productive they are. And one really important feature of all varieties is their sensitivity to day length. So you have what are called short day varieties and day neutral varieties.
Welcome back, my friends, to the Beet podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. We're talking all about the fruit I recommend most people to grow as beginners before any other fruit, and that would be strawberries. And we have Gerald Holmes on the show. He's the founding director of the Strawberry Center at Cal Poly State University in San Luis Obispo, which is a college I almost went to. I actually went to University of California, Santa Barbara. That was my second choice, Gerald. Gerald got his PhD in plant pathology from UC Riverside in 1994, and then worked at a cooperative extension farm advisor in Puro County for 3 years. So you have a ton of experience in this world, far more than I do. Strawberries, one of mine and our listeners' favorite fruits to grow, Gerald. And we're starting it off with strawberry flavor, which I think is a cool place to start. Like, as someone who's cultivated these and is the founding director of the Strawberry Center, like what factors go into strawberry flavor?
For me, it's mostly the sweetness of it and the acidity. So I like to have both. Some strawberries are just super sweet. I think of it kind of like peaches. Some peaches are just sugary sweet, and then some have a little bit of a tartness to them, an acid, and I think similar for strawberries. I like the combination. I think it gives it a lot more depth. And so that's something I look for. The texture is also really important to the flavor, and so is the aroma. You don't think about that, but before it ever touches your tongue, it'll touch your nostrils, and you start to get a sense of what's there just by the aroma. And some varieties are much more aromatic than others.
So how much of those three, so the sweetness, the acidity, I guess those four, the texture and the aroma, how much would you say is variety controlled, and how much can be expressed through an approach to growing the strawberry, like a better approach to cultivating a strawberry?
I think it's mostly genetic, right? Mostly the variety. But then the environmental conditions are really important. And I'm thinking mostly of rainfall, so water, how much moisture is in the soil, sunlight. Best environmental conditions would be sunny days, cool nights, and fruit ripening in those circumstances. Really, really flavorful. Our spring, they're flavorful all year long, but really I love the flavor in the spring because the fruit are ripening in those kind of conditions. They're really large also that time of year. The plants are really vigorous, and we get a little bit more time on the plant. That also helps because the temperatures are lower. It takes longer to go from flower to fruit. And so that, I think, helps accumulate flavors. And then again, your sunny days, a lot of photosynthesis, cool nights, and then repeat. But if you get a rainfall and the soil gets saturated, that flavor gets diluted and they'll taste watery. And so from one harvest to the next on a farm, the flavor will vary dramatically.
Yeah, I didn't realize the impact, I guess, or how big the impact of rain would be on the dilution, I guess, of the sugars and the acidity, right? Both flavor profiles.
Everything gets diluted. And not only that, but even more importantly, is the rainfall actually destroys the fruit.
Oh, how so?
Because as the raindrops pelt the surface of the fruit, it damages the fruit surface. It's such a delicate fruit that rainfall hitting the surface of the fruit will damage it. And if you get a rainfall that's sustained, over the course of a day, let's say, it will ruin every piece of ripe fruit out there that is exposed to the rainfall. And the growers have to go out there and just basically strip pick the entire field and then hope that the next set of fruit is born in better conditions.
And these would be growers of commercial strawberries, right? So they're going out and saying, hey, this rain's going to be so heavy that it's going to damage effectively that skin tissue layer and maybe even a little deeper, such that if I was to harvest it and try to transport that, like it would degrade quicker because the cells are sort of already damaged.
Yeah. And they're not doing it in advance of the rain. They're doing it after the rain. So the rain comes, you never know how
I
much
see.
it's going to rain and for what duration. So they'll wait for the rain and then they'll go out and inspect the fruit. And you can see the damage on the fruit. And if there's a lot of damage, they'll just strip pick it and throw it away.
Oh, so that they won't even use that for some other purpose.
If possible, they'll use it for juice. You can do that, but the market has to be right for that as well. And usually at that time of year, it's not a great market for juice. Usually the juice market comes later.
Sure. Okay, that's interesting. So when you're saying sunny days, cool nights, do you have a temp range on sunny and cool in those respective time periods?
Yeah, think about coastal California. A nice sunny warm day in the spring would be in the 70s, low 70s to mid 70s, and then at night it probably gets down into the mid to low 50s. That's ideal. When you
Got
get
it.
yeah, it's tight, and that's why
So pretty
coastal
tight
California is like
range.
one of the greatest places in the world to grow strawberries, is because we get those conditions literally all year long. But if you get above 85 degrees and you get below freezing, obviously freezing is going to freeze the blooms, and above 85, everything gets too soft. The fruit gets soft. Plants are not as robust in that kind of environment. Especially the fruit are just, if they're exposed to the sun, they'll be sunburned, and when they get that soft, they're harder to pick without bruising. And then those bruised fruit get in the clamshell, and the clamshell, they're more likely to rot.
Yeah, I would have never imagined, I guess, that the pressure of the rain falling on the fruit would have that big an impact.
I know, right? You think, well, we just want rain. We can't farm without water, can't grow crops, and that's true. But we don't want it really falling from the sky and hitting the fruit like that. If you were growing them in a garden in your backyard, you'd probably pick those fruit and eat them, even with the damage that's on them. But a commercial farmer can't take that risk. They can't pack all that fruit, pay the expense of picking it, put it on a truck and ship it somewhere, only to have problems with it on arrival. That's very, very expensive. So they don't take the risk.
Yeah, because I feel like with these berries that you'll see in the grocery store, whether it's a strawberry or raspberry, blackberry, blueberry, one of those fruits going bad in the clamshell sort of just wrecks the entire clamshell. So every single chance you can get to eliminate that seems like commercially a viable thing to do.
You figure there's somewhere between 10 to 20 individual fruit inside of a single clamshell. If one of those is rotten, that spells a problem. And then they dig deeper. And if you're getting that level, 5 to 10%, you're way above what is acceptable.
Yeah. As a gardener and not as a farmer, if you think about ways a gardener could go wrong as far as strawberry flavor, is it mostly what we already talked about? Or are there perhaps some like interesting mistakes where gardeners kind of veer off the right way to grow strawberries, let's say?
I think the most common problem in gardening would probably be over or under watering. Fertilization can also do it. You could push the plants a little too hard, and they get rank growth. You get too leafy, and they don't produce as many flowers as they would normally. Those would be common mistakes in backyard gardening. But I don't think those things you're going to see. Yeah. If you're growing strawberries in your backyard, you're going to see that flavor going up and down every time you pick one. It's going to be a little bit of a grab bag, because we have out here on our farm, we have usually every year somewhere between 60 and 100 different varieties of strawberries, and I get to taste them all the time, and I'm always surprised at what I find. Usually I'm very pleasantly surprised. So I don't think bad flavor, when I'm getting consistently flavor that I don't enjoy, it's the variety. You need to switch up the variety. You need to be growing something that's got better flavor.
So variety above all else, and then care. And you did mention fertilizer or fertility. Would you recommend some sort of fertilizer program when someone's growing out strawberries at home, or just kind of working with the soil
Yeah.
or potting
No,
mix that they
strawberries are
have?
going to need some fertilization. And there's a lot of different ways of doing that. And this is an area I'm not an expert in. Growers all have their special cocktails that they use, and there's lots of different companies that sell, different components of those cocktails, maybe the whole program itself. Everybody swears by their own. I'm not an expert in it, but I know that strawberries definitely need to be fertilized because it's a long crop. Strawberries are a perennial plant. They will keep growing all year long. And in order for them to produce fruit and to continue to produce new crowns with new fruit on the new leaves, new fruit, you're going to have to supply. Mostly it's going to be high in nitrogen, but phosphorus and potassium as well. Uh, the micronutrients are less important depending on the soil you're in. But like if you're growing in a hydroponic, like in a potting mix that's basically almost sterile, right? It's perlite or vermiculite. You're going to need to supply probably some micronutrients as well. Boron deficiency, calcium deficiency, really, really common problems in those kinds of environments. But in agricultural soils, not typically limiting in those ways. So keeping the moisture even is really important, and that's not an easy thing to do because the temperatures are fluctuating and the plant is changing. It starts off as we usually start plants as bare root transplants, and when we plant those, it'll be kind of warm, and so they'll get off to a good start. We'll do that in the fall. Then the temperatures go down during the winter, and the plants aren't growing very fast, but they are growing. But they don't need a lot of moisture. They don't need a lot of nutrients. But then when they start coming out of that, they do. So you can't really decide at that moment to start feeding them those nutrients. They have to be there when the plant needs them. And the way strawberries are farmed in California, all of that is delivered through drip irrigation. And so
Right,
anyway,
right.
you're
Yeah.
riding so everything is changing. The day length is changing, the temperatures are changing outdoors, and also the plant is getting bigger, and then you'll have a heavy fruit load. You start off with very few fruit, then you get a lot of fruit, then it kind of crashes down, and then it comes back up, and you have these peaks and valleys of production all throughout the year.
Yeah. It's a fascinating crop when you think about it on the commercial scale because it's a backyard grower. You can simplify a lot of that, or even if you're growing it suboptimally, you
Yeah.
can. So, I've grown some wild varieties, Gerald, and of course, I've grown some garden varieties.
Where did you get wild ones?
Well, that's the thing is, I was about to say, I don't know that they're true wild. I think they're sort of advertised
Okay.
as like semi-unimproved type varieties that have probably been through some level of domestication. Is my guess, like an alpine
Yeah.
strawberry. So these were very small ones. So maybe that's where I was going to start. Is where did the strawberry come from
Strawberries
originally?
are native to many areas of the world. So if you look at a map of where all the wild strawberries are grown, it's mostly in the northern hemisphere. And there are also wild strawberries in the southern hemisphere, but not nearly as diverse. So all along the Pacific coast of the Americas, you have wild strawberries. That is the Fragaria chiloensis species, the beach strawberry. And then on the east coast of North America and all over North America and Canada, you have Fragaria virginiana, the woodland strawberry. And those two were actually accidentally cross-pollinated in a French botanic garden in Brittany, France. And, this was during 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. Explorers were traveling all over the world and collecting plant material and bringing it back to the old world, putting it in these gardens. And they just so happened to have a chiloensis from Chile and a virginiana from North America. And those two things were in the same garden, and they they cross-pollinated and they produced a superior looking variety that then was used and still used to this day as the garden strawberry that we eat. It's a hybrid. It's a Virginiana chiloensis cross, and it forms the hybrid what we call Fragaria ananassa, and that specific epithet ananassa is refers to pineapple because of the aroma that some strawberries have, much like a pineapple type of aroma. So that's the way it's expressed. The Latin name is Fragaria x ananassa, and it originated in about the same time in both France and England. And then these things were shipped, transported all over the world, and we've made some great improvements to strawberry over the years. It's interesting. A few years ago, I was backpacking in the Sierras with some colleagues, and we ran across some wild strawberry. This would have been Fragaria vesca, the woodland strawberry. That's what you would find in the mountains. And it was hard to find a fruit on them. And my colleague said, "Oh, you should grow those, because you put those on a salad in a very high-end chic restaurant. People would pay big bucks to have that kind of stuff in their salad." And I couldn't agree more. I think people would pay a lot of money for that, and they would need to, because they're not a plentiful thing. They're hard to find, and they're not also as flavorful, and they don't have as much meat on them as our current strawberries, right? They're mostly seeds. If you look at them, they're just full of seeds. And of course, strawberries have seeds on them, but what we see in the supermarket, that strawberry, all those seeds, they're quite spread apart compared to what you would see. Think of that same fruit that's maybe an inch or two long, and now make that a quarter of an inch, and all those seeds are still there. So it gets very seedy, but
yeah,
the flavor is, my experience, there's lots of different wild strawberries. There's many different species. So the ones that I've had when I've found them, which is relatively few, are very tart, very small, and full of seeds.
How much is that flavor reminiscent of what you'd call, I guess, the essence of strawberry, that flavor? Can you still taste that? It's just maybe overshadowed by the seed and the tart?
Yeah, it's still there. But I would say not. I wouldn't actually choose it. If I had both in front of me in equal quantities, I would choose the one that we've bred. And I mean, if you think about it, that's what breeders have tried to do, is they've tried to breed the plant in such a way that we get more of what we want, less of what we don't want. So they get rid of the excessive tartness, they get rid of the seediness, they make the fruit a little bigger, a lot bigger, right? So all that's what breeding is, and that's the amazing things that they've achieved in modern breeding.
When we talk about the initial cross, you mentioned 1500, 1600, 1700. How long would you say it took to improve those two wilds with the one hybrid cross? Well, do you have any sense of what the process was after that to get to where we are with, call it like a seascape strawberry or some of these classic varieties that a lot of us gardeners are growing?
1766, I think, was the year that we know Antoine Duchesne in France found this cross. So that's a long time ago, right? But we've made incremental improvements to strawberries ever since then. Seascape was something that was bred at the University of California, and that's a relatively modern variety, but it's old enough that it's no longer grown, at least in California. Very little of it would be grown in California. Wow. There's other varieties that perform better, and so it has fallen to the wayside like everything. Eventually, these varieties have a lifespan, and they're popular for a time, and then they fall out of favor because they're super susceptible to some disease, or they're replaced by another variety that's better tasting and yields much more fruit. And so Seascape, I know it's still grown in other places in the world, but in California, it's so little of it grown, we don't even mention it.
Interesting. And when you say so little of it grown, you're speaking from a commercial perspective.
I am, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we talk about, let's say, a seascape, right? And I've learned a bit of this from other plant lines that have been bred out, certain tomato varieties, heirloom versus hybrid, that discussion. Is it mostly because, let's say seascape comes out, farmers start growing it, it starts to outperform, maybe because of the breeding characteristics of it, but also perhaps just because it's really well suited for a time to the growing environment. And then eventually the rest of Mother Nature sort of catches up, and a disease perhaps like mutates enough that it's very easily able to interact well from its perspective with let's say the seascape strawberry. So then eventually you're sort of battling, like you're breeding, and you're sort of breeding in characteristics of resistance or performance or something, but the rest of the ecosystem is kind of like coming at that variety, and that's why breeders are never really done with their job.
It's true that breeders are never really done, and what you're describing sounds like the pest and disease, a battle that goes on between microorganisms and plants. I don't know if it's a battle for survival, I guess, but if we develop, for example, we have a really important disease of the roots and vascular system called Fusarium wilt, and you can breed in very, very effective resistance to Fusarium wilt. And you can plant those plants in a field that has a lot of that pathogen in the soil, and they will not really succumb to it at all. But over time, the pathogen tends to evolve in such a way that the pathogen and the plant are in a constant state of exchange there. And the pathogen is trying to grow in an environment where it is successful, and the plant is trying to grow in its environment and be successful. And unfortunately, those two things are going to come into conflict. And so there's a disease called Fusarium wilt. We can breed resistance to that disease, but eventually, depending on the type of resistance that it is, and in this case, it's a single gene or a few genes, and so the pathogen is able to overcome that resistance by mutating just a single gene or a couple of genes. So that there's always this trade-off. It's easier to breed for resistance when it's a single gene, but it's also easier for the pathogen to overcome that resistance when it's based on a single gene. And so in some agricultural systems,
Yeah.
it's all we can do to stay one step ahead of the pathogen by breeding the next set of genes into the plants that will become resistant to the pathogen. Sometimes that lasts decades, and sometimes it lasts a couple of years. It just depends on the system you're talking about. We just have a situation in California with Fusarium wilt where after now 20 years of successful breeding and resistance, we have this pathogen overcoming, and we have a new race.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. I think not enough growers and home gardeners, especially out there, have a sense for how much work goes into creating these varieties that they grow at home, or even grab at a farmer's market, or certainly grab at a grocery store. So we talked a little bit, Gerald, about wild strawberries, how the garden strawberry sort of came to be, but we didn't talk too much about the strawberry varieties that have come to be as a result of that progression, and maybe the strawberries that are grown today. So what would a home gardener want to know just starting out about, like, maybe the sheer variety that exists?
Yeah, to know that there are literally thousands of varieties, not thousands available, but over the course of, say, the last 100 years, there's really thousands of varieties that have been developed and used in commercial farming. It's hard. A lot of times I go to these home and garden centers and I see these strawberry plants for sale. Often they're not even labeled as to what the variety is. And so people, I think, have this notion that, well, a strawberry is a strawberry and there aren't a lot of varieties, but there are. And they're very different in the way they taste and the way they grow, and how easily they are to manage, how many runners they might produce, how many flowers, how productive they are. And one really important feature of all varieties is their sensitivity to day length. So you have what are called short day varieties,
Right.
and day neutral varieties. The short day varieties are used in areas where we have a short season. So Florida, for example, is another state that produces a lot of strawberries, and they have a very short season compared to California, and they grow only the short day varieties. And short day varieties, I think of like a sprinter. You wouldn't put the same kind of an athlete, same kind of a runner in a 100-yard dash as you would in a marathon, right? They're very different physicality to those two types of individuals. And that's kind of like the short day is like the sprinter, and the day neutral is like a long distance runner, a marathon runner. So the day neutrals will produce fruit regardless of the day length, and the short day varieties will produce their fruit during the short days of the year. And when the days get long, they'll stop totally, or they'll very much reduce their fruit production. It's not like a light switch that's either short day or day neutral. There's this kind of quantitative aspect to it. You can be a very strong day neutral, you can be a very weak day neutral, etc. Yeah.
And how would these map to, I think, the home gardener terminology that's often used, which would be to say like a June bearing strawberry versus an ever bearing strawberry?
Yeah. The June bearing would be the short day, and the ever bearing would be the day neutral. And so knowing that is really important. Where do you live? Do you have a short spring where you just have the very few weeks where the temperatures are ideal for strawberries and then it gets too hot? I lived in North Carolina for 14 years, and North Carolina's climate is such that you get a relatively short spring compared to California, and then it gets too hot. So by the time April is done, your strawberries are done too. Whereas if you're living along the coast in California, you can just keep going, and I think a day neutral would be much more advantageous.
Yeah, that's what I've tended to grow. I've done some June bearing just for fun. And at least my observations, they tend to be a little bit larger, and they tend to, as the name I guess implies, cluster that ripening window around like maybe 4 to 6 weeks around June-ish. And then the ever bearing just keep going. I mean, I do live in San Diego, about a couple miles from the coast, so I've got the climate for the most part that you speak of when it comes to like getting good sweetness out of the strawberry, getting good flavor, getting long season production. Varieties wise, like, do you have a recommendation for a home gardener, whether it be a day neutral or a short day?
So the varieties would be different. You can't buy a variety
right.
like, let's say, Albion, which I really, really like. It's a fantastic flavor, but you can't buy Albion in short day and in day neutral, right? It's a day neutral, so or ever bearing. And so I don't know how available the stuff I see in home and garden centers tends to be heirloom, older varieties, names that are like really old, 20, 50 years old. And I don't know how they perform because we don't grow them anymore commercially in California. So I'm familiar with the commercial varieties. Like our biggest variety in California is Monterey. It's a variety that we grow on. About 35% of all the acres in California are Monterey. That says a lot for a variety. For a variety to achieve that level of success, says that is a super successful variety, and it's been successful for a couple of decades. So if you could find Monterey, I think you'd have a really robust plant that performs extremely well, at least under California conditions.
It's interesting because, the variety you mentioned a couple shows ago, which was Seascape, that you mentioned, it was great. It's no longer great. It's not cultivated commercially very much, to the degree that we don't even mention it as commercial growers anymore. That is one that has made its way to the home garden market, though, quite a bit. And I'm sort of wondering, as just out of curiosity, do you feel like perhaps as things go out of style from a commercial perspective, maybe they make their way to the home garden market at that point?
They certainly can. Sometimes it's maybe the nurseries have an easy time of propagating it, and it produces lots of plants. It's easy for them to produce that way. I don't think the home gardener is very discriminating because they're not really they're not performing any kind of critical evaluation of multiple varieties. So they're kind of taking what is provided to them. I wouldn't want to throw Seascape too far under the bus, because I was in Canada, up in Quebec, and they only grow Seascape up there, and they haven't been able to find a suitable replacement. So in certain areas, and you can imagine how different the Pacific Northeast would be from coastal California, but there you go. You have a variety that was bred for California production, found its way into the production system of Quebec, Canada, and they're loving it. And their clientele, their customer base, loves the flavor, loves the aroma, loves the size of the fruit, loves the way it looks and smells and tastes. So, everybody finds a niche, and it's great to have that kind of diversity available. I just, I don't know how you, as a home gardener, are able to find, whatever variety you want, let's say. I think it's kind of tough, because you're not going to buy that many plants. So obviously the production is geared towards commercial agriculture, because they're going to buy millions of plants, and a home gardener is going to buy 10, or 20 plants. And that just isn't a market that anybody's terribly interested in.
All too interested. Yeah, when you can sell 1 million, why sell 10? I think, there's small farms around the country really that produce some, and they'll offer some to the home garden market. They're probably not the ones that are servicing the commercial market anyways. And that's where we've tended to find a lot of ours, which has been knowing the variety, specifically if it's going to be a short day or day neutral and really that's climate dependent, is the first step. And then what you can find, I guess, is what you can find in your area or shopping online. Because, like Gerald said, there's a lot of varieties, and some of them just might not be available to a home gardener. When we talk about home gardeners specifically, what would you say are the more common pests or diseases that can hit a strawberry plant?
Well, the most obvious one that you're going to see is botrytis fruit rot, or gray mold. And the fruit, if you've ever stored strawberries for any length of time, that's probably the primary thing that will rot them. It's the most important fruit disease of strawberries worldwide. And the good news about the home gardener is you can get to it before the fungus does. Get out there and pick them and eat them before they're stored for any length of time. Before the bruise leads to an infection, which leads to the mold. So you can do a lot, and protecting them from the rain, protecting them from the soil is really important to preventing botrytis gray mold. Another one that you would see is powdery mildew. Fortunately, that's not as big of a problem, but it can be a pretty significant problem. People can control that with either resistance in the variety, but if you don't have a variety that's resistant to it, or if you don't know, which is more typical, you can use things like a sulfur dust, which is organically approved for managing powdery mildew. But those are kind of above ground problems. Below ground, you have some serious concerns as well. Root rots, vascular wilts, and we think of 4 main diseases of strawberries in California. We have verticillium wilt, fusarium wilt, macrophomina root rot, and Phytophthora root rot. That last one, Phytophthora, is more influenced by high moisture. So if you get really waterlogged soils with insufficient drainage, that's when Phytophthora becomes an issue. And so that's one that you can fight culturally by just managing water. And I would suggest, even for commercial growers, that's the way they should be managing that disease. The other 2 diseases, macrophomina and verticillium wilt, again, the plant resistance to it is important. And also you can escape these diseases by providing optimal conditions. So if you water stress plants, you're more likely to get macrophomina. And verticillium and fusarium also will thrive in a more stressful environment. Fusarium wilt, we have great resistance to that disease as long as you have race 1, which is the most likely scenario. It would be unusual if you had the race 2, since that's a very new occurrence in our industry. So,
and you say race 1, race 2, that would be Fusarium wilt race 1, Fusarium wilt race 2. Different type of
correct
mutation or something.
Correct. And race 2 is very rare. So I think for a home gardener, just focus on Fusarium wilt, forget about the races, and you're probably safe to assume that.
I mean, you have a PhD in plant pathology. I have a PhD in know things. So this is my amateur understanding. But would you say, generally speaking, it would hold true for most of these commercially or recreationally cultivated edibles, strawberries, other crops, that mapping their growing conditions to what sort of they evolved to or what they want as a crop is the best way, or one of the best ways, to prevent disease and pests? Like the stronger the plant is, the healthier the plant is, the more its ability to resist, regardless of even genetic resistances it might have. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, it's accurate. You want a healthy plant. You can overdo it. You can push a plant too hard with fertilizers, and they become the growth is rank. You get excessive succulent growth, and actually, that kind of environment, that kind of growing condition can lead to excessive disease. So you don't want to push it. You want to give it that optimum, not too much, not too little, and then and then you're likely to resist more, and more diseases have a healthier plant. On the stressful end of things, you can really cause more disease by stressing it for water, stressing it for nutrients, and that also. The other part of this that we haven't talked about yet is pests. So not only do the diseases thrive in these stressful environments, but a lot of the pests do too. Our 2 biggest pests in strawberries in California are lygus bugs and spider mites. And spider mites...
Lygus bugs. I'd never heard of those.
Lygus bugs, yeah. Lygus hesperus is the species. And it's a small winged adult bug that does fly. It actually feeds on these seeds and causes cat facing or deformation of the fruit. I think home gardeners are less concerned about than commercial growers, but if you have cat facing and a lot of it, you basically don't have a marketable fruit for commercial purposes. But
right, yeah, because someone will look at the clamshell and say, "I'm not buying this. This looks weird." Right.
Right. Like, why are these all lumpy? And they don't even put them in the clamshell. They take them to the juicer. So, but spider mites have a totally different effect, and they're the ones that thrive in these stressful environments. So when it's hot and dusty and windy, that's when spider mites will take hold. And when if you're in California and you drive by strawberry fields, you'll notice that on the ends of the beds, you'll see these little crops of grasses like ryegrass or wheat, and those are actually dust barriers. And the fields are usually surrounded by a silt fence. And then you'll see water trucks going up and down the roads that access these fields to keep the dust down. So the dust is a very important factor for spider mites. And of course, you don't want dusty fruit either. But if you have a dusty, hot environment that's dry, spider mites really thrive in that, and they'll get their start at the edge of the field and then move inward. And because that's where all the dust is occurring, so that's why they have silt fences and then these dust barriers at the ends of the bed. In your home garden, you don't have that problem, right? You don't have to deal with trucks coming in and out of and making a dust. So
no, no, unless you count the recycling guy once a week or something like that. But no, you're totally right. I mean, would you say for the home gardener, are lygus bugs really even a concern, or is it spider mites that are probably the issue? I mean, that's the one I know, and you'll see that in other crops as well.
Spider mites are going to be the bigger issue, I think, in the home garden. Lygus are kind of a late season problem for us, generally speaking, and they kind of move out of when the food source in another area is declining, they'll start to move, so you think about, again, the hills surrounding commercial fields that are green in the spring, and then they dry down. Those ligas will move. This is our hypothesis anyways, that they're moving from these green areas into other green areas like crops. And they cause damage on a number of crops, not just strawberries, but we lose a lot to ligas. But I think the home gardener, yes, it's really the spider mites, and the beauty of that is that home gardeners can do a lot to prevent spider mites, keep those plants hydrated. Spider mites hate a moist environment. They hate a clean and hydrated environment, and they don't do well when it rains, but you can make it rain artificially and keep those critters in check.
I've often recommended, for at least mild to moderate spider mites, just kind of spraying the plants down a couple times tends to be enough. That's my experience. And so, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because, sometimes everyone's climate is different. Everyone's struggles with pests and disease can be different based on their geography and what's in that environment. I typically run into more disease problems on my strawberries rather than pests. But hopefully for those of you listening, if you struggle with any of these, you've got a bit more of a primer on what to do. So, when I went up, Gerald, quick story, I guess a while ago now, maybe half my life ago, to go check out schools. The thing that I didn't know at the time is how much of a gardener I would become. I hadn't grown a plant in my life really up until that point. But when I went up to Cal Poly SLO, there was a viticulture program. There was a agriculture, there's a pasture program. There's all these sort of agricultural fields. And I thought that was so interesting. And honestly, in a different life, I probably would have gone there instead of University of California, Santa Barbara. I got an economics degree, and, I don't think that hurt me at all, but would have been cool to have a bit more of an educational background in plants given what I do today. So when we talk about the strawberry center, I'd kind of love to just know what it actually is.
Yeah, thank you for asking. The Strawberry Center is a partnership between Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and the California Strawberry Commission. The California Strawberry Commission is an organization that represents all of the growers, processors, and shippers of strawberries in the state of California. That's about 300 to 400 different people. And Cal Poly has a reputation for being a great agricultural school with programs in all areas of agriculture. Our College of Agriculture is, I think, the fourth or fifth largest college of agriculture in the country. We have over 4,000 students, 9 departments, and many of the people that work in California Strawberries are graduates of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I graduated from Cal Poly Pomona because that's where I am from. I lived close to that campus, and it was a great school to go to. And so there's two. Well, just recently we added a third Cal Poly, but the two Cal Polys are Pomona and San Luis Obispo, San Luis being the first, and then Pomona following that. And now I think they've made CSU Humboldt a third Cal Poly.
No way. Wow.
Yeah, the other two ag campuses are CSU Chico or Chico State, and then CSU Fresno or Fresno State. And so with those 4 or 5 campuses, we have all the ag programs in the Cal State University system. So it makes a lot of sense when the commission was looking to partner with a university to form a research organization that would address many of the issues that they're having, that it be Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, because we are smack dab in the middle of the 40,000 acres of strawberries that exist in the state of California. We're about a 2.5 hour drive to Ventura, Oxnard, and then to the south, and then to the north, Watsonville and Salinas, and then just a little bit south of us is Santa Maria. And those are the 3 districts that make up most of the strawberry production in California. And California grows, most people don't know this either. Most people know that California grows a lot of strawberries, but California actually grows 90% of all of the strawberries produced in this country.
Wow. Where are the other 10?
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's got to be something like that. Otherwise, even there, though, I mean, most Floridian climates aren't even close to what would be considered optimal for strawberry production, right? Because it gets too hot and probably too humid.
It gets too hot, so it makes their season short. But they do have that early season window, and it's been a thriving, I think, agricultural commodity for the state of Florida. They continue. They have, I don't know, 12,000 acres of strawberries there, so it's a significant
Yeah.
production there. There's a lot of strawberries grown in Mexico, also in Baja California. There's actually strawberries grown in every state. When I lived in North Carolina, we had a U-pick within 5 miles of any place I could go in the state. So that's kind of the way strawberries exist in many other states. It's a wonderful environment. It's wonderful to take kids out and pick strawberries. I mean, my kids love that. I loved it. I still love it. Yeah.
I love it. I've got some growing in a vertical system outside right now, and it's hot. So I'm gonna probably go grab some after this and see how they taste. Give them a harvest. So how did you come to before I ask, the thing I find so interesting about doing the Beet podcast, which we've done for I believe 7 years now, is having folks like you on, and then I'll be out and about somewhere traveling or maybe at an event or something, and someone will say like, I changed my major because of listening to the show or maybe watching the videos or something like that. And so that's why I love having folks like you on, because it shows a path in the world of plants that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a farmer or you have to do something that you might think stereotypically you would need to do. And so, how did you come to be the founding director of the Strawberry Center?
Well, it's a long and sinuous path, lots of forks in the road. But I grew up in an urban environment in suburban Orange County, California, and I got my interest in farming doing gardening with my dad. My dad grew up on a farm, and he left the farm along with all of his siblings, like the rest of America, it seems, or almost all of us, migrated from the farm to other kinds of jobs. And I kind of fought upstream to get back into agriculture from an urban setting, and really glad I did. It's been a wonderful career. I think farming is a really dynamic industry. It has so many aspects to it that are interesting to study, and you can be a molecular biology student studying the interactions between microbes and plants, or you can be study the production systems, how plants respond to fertilizers or pests or diseases. Every one of these areas is just its own world, and there's so much to learn there, and we do make great strides. I have so much respect for farmers, for what they're able to achieve, and I'm glad to be at a campus, to be able to interact with students and to help them find their way in this same industry, introduce them to people and to concepts and problems and ideas that make the light go on, and all of a sudden students that only had a vague interest in this suddenly become extremely interested in it. I've seen them go from wanting to be a dentist to getting a PhD in entomology or plant pathology, and it's really fun to see that. So my path was a slow one, starting with an interest in high school in horticulture and gardening, and then in my travels, I lived in Paraguay, South America. I saw a very different style of agriculture, slash and burn, primitive style agriculture juxtaposed with modern agriculture. I wanted to know more about that. I wanted to know how people did that. And I found out how people did that by coming to Cal Poly and studying agronomy. From there, I studied plant pathology because I found that to be a niche that was very, very interesting. And then from there, started working on different crops. And I didn't come to Cal Poly until late in my career, and really answered an ad when I was in a position where I was I was at a fork in the road and looking for another path. And the job description fit my qualifications to a T. I applied. And so I went from knowing very, very relatively little about strawberries to now serving in this industry for the last 10 years. And actually, we're celebrating our 10th year this year. We have a field day every summer, and we're celebrating our 10th year at our field day this summer. And it's been a really interesting and fun thing to shepherd along. I think we've done a lot of good for the industry. I think we've done a lot of good for many students. We have about 50 students every year now are part of our program. We're mentoring graduate students. We're teaching courses. We're hosting lectures of all kinds. It's a great, what I love about Cal Poly is, you can sit at one university, you probably sit in a room and talk about what strawberries might look like and have a slideshow. But at Cal Poly, you can walk about 5 minutes out to a strawberry field and talk to somebody who's actually doing research on strawberries, stand in the furrow, look at the flowers, look at the fruit, and talk really nitty gritty about the production practices that are currently in place. I love that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's so cool, and I think you're right. Like when the lights go on, like for me, it was quite some time ago. I was growing like a little cucumber. It's like you can't see it another way once you start to realize, I guess, the intrigue that the world of plants can provide. And so it's been really awesome having you on. Congrats on the 10-year anniversary. All of Gerald's info, as well as the Strawberry Center's info, will be in the podcast descriptions this week, guys. Thanks for coming on, Gerald. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.